All right, now I'm joined by the elite guest of a panel of guests who would be joining us today in the special broadcast. We have with us Professor W.P.S. Sidhu, Center for Global Affairs, New York University. We have with us Mr. Anand Mittal, political analyst from Washington, D.C. And we have with us Mr. Ramesh Ramachandran, who's the editor and the foreign affairs expert. A very good evening and thank you so much to all our guests for joining us on this special broadcast. First of all, coming on to you, Sir Sidhu, W.P.S. Sidhu. Arizona is a key state to the United States election and the voters are saying that the people can change their minds here. Economy is being seen as the key factor here, driven by the youngsters, especially talking about Arizona. But as we come closer towards the polling closure, how the US economy is going to rule the results here?
Well, the US economy is certainly going to be one element of that, but as you very rightly pointed out, there are many other issues as well, including immigration or the perception, particularly for a state like Arizona, of how secure the border is, and really against migrants as well, in many ways, and as is abortion. So there are many issues that are going to be determining this aspect, and if we were to draw perhaps a hierarchy, it would really depend on what is the background of the voter. If there are voters coming from the less, privileged in economic terms class, then obviously inflation, the economy is going to be a very important factor. But if you are educated, perhaps a little bit more privileged or in position, then clearly other elements are going to be an important factor, including abortion, for example. And that is something which we need to still sort of see how that's going to play out. And one way perhaps to identify that would be to see what has been the turnout from the different communities, particularly those who are affected by the inflation and see economy as a big concern. And there's no doubt, of course, that those who feel economy is a big issue and that they've been hurting for the last 4 years are certainly going to be in the camp of Trump. And we've heard that from some of the voters who you've already spoken to as well. But clearly, economy is not the only issue on this ballot.
And also, now let's talk about the India angle here. For that, I would like to first come across to Mr. Ramesh Ramachandran. When we talk about India and US relation, we heard External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar talking about it, and he said that irrespective of the results, the relationship is going to go stronger only. How do you see this currently?
Well, there's no denying that India-US ties enjoy bipartisan support across the political spectrum in the US and in India. Now, there are always highs and lows, crests and troughs in any relationship between peoples or countries or government. To that extent, we've seen some issues crop up every now and then, but on balance, I would say that India-US ties are always on a steady keel, so to speak, and it's become predictable as time goes by. Now, it's one of India's most consequential relationships in the world. The same is true for the US. It is strategic partnership. In many ways, it has a global footprint. And the bedrock of India-US ties, Deepika, is people-to-people ties, the exchange of people, be it students, business persons or academics for that matter, the living bridge, so to speak, between India and the US, which is the bedrock or the main pillar of the relationship, in addition to trade and investment, defense and security, space, civil, nuclear energy, high technology, and so on and so forth. And to come to your point about what Minister Jaishankar had to say, I will quote Prime Minister Modi here when he addressed the US Congress in 2016, and I have the exact quote somewhere here. If I can quote from his speech, Deepika, if you allow me just 30 more seconds. Quote, "Today our relationship has overcome the hesitations of history. Comfort, candor and convergence define our conversations. Through the cycle of elections and transition of administrations, the intensity of engagements has only grown. And in this exciting journey, the US Congress has acted as its compass. You have helped us turn barriers into bridges of partnership," unquote. Now, talking about or contrasting Trump and the Biden-Harris administration, Deepika, Two things stand out. During Trump, we saw the Quad being revived, number one, and number two, his emphasis or accent or focus on the Indo-Pacific in general and China in particular in his national security strategy. Talking about Biden-Harris, Deepika, we saw Biden elevate the Quad to an annual summit level, and Biden and Prime Minister Modi initiated what is known as the ICET, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, including semiconductors for that matter, which has taken off in the last 1 year and more, co-chaired by the two NSAs of India and the US. There have been some lows during Trump, for instance, on the issue of GSP, on the, when the US ended India's determination or status of being a beneficiary developing country. But we've seen, some developments of late, including, for instance, the formation of what is known as the Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, Jain American caucus in the US legislature, which is growing in size by the day. So, on balance, Deepika, if you look at India-US ties, India's rise, some would say, is inevitable. So the US can ignore India only at its own expense. Plus, the rise of Indian Americans in the US domestic polity also plays a key role in the India-US ties. So India, in a sense, is becoming indispensable to managing global affairs, be it climate change, be it counterterrorism, be it the Indo-Pacific, and so on. So the India-US ties are in good stead, so to speak.
That talks about volumes about when we talk about India and US relationship, the bilateral relationship that each other share with both of them share with each other. Now coming on to you, Mr. Anand Mittal, what impact will the new president have on India-US's existing relationship?
I think regardless of who wins, the India-US relationship will stand the test of time. I think that's what your other panelists said. That's what the feeling here is in Washington, D.C., that the relationship is much more important than ordinary partisan politics or any kind of minor roadblocks like this issue with the India-Canada fight, the tiff over that, or any kind of trade or immigration issues. Even during Trump, there were some issues, and he has intimated again that he might try to strike a deal with India on immigration, maybe on things like steel and manufacturing. But quite honestly, both sides, Democrats and Republicans, realize that India is going to be an important partner in the Indo-Pacific Asia policy, trying to make sure that China's influence is curbed, and that making sure that India is seen as a better partner that actually reflects American values, reflects the things that America cares about. So I think regardless of who wins, that will not change that much. But I do think that the Democrats tend to find it much more easier to comment on what Indian officials say there are internal issues, things like religious violence or minority issues or even the farmers' protest. So I think that is going to create some tensions. But as I said, those are minor tensions, like just as with this Canada fight, that the Indian State Department or the American State Department has said, we're concerned, but they don't say anything beyond that. They don't make any declarative statements. They don't say, India has to do this or India has to do that. They only stress cooperation. But so you're going to see some of those kind of things raise it up a little bit more.
But the past relationship speaks a lot, and when we talk about tech, also coming on to you, Professor Sidhu, tech cooperation will also be key here. Right from, you would remember, ICET to Artemis Accords, India and the US has seen a transformational journey. But will the result also lead to a major boost in India-US elections and their relationship with each other?
So I agree with all of the other panelists, including Ramesh as well as Atul Mittal, in the sense that this relationship is on a trajectory which is very, very steady, and it's going in one direction, which is up. The only question is going to be the speed of that trajectory. And that is where I think, political leaders can play a role in both countries. Some have been more forward-looking and have been promoting and enhancing and advancing the relationship and been willing to address some of the hurdles which appear between any relationship between these two countries. Given that, I think you're now certainly seeing in the post-pandemic era a very important focus and idea to kind of have supply chain resilience. essentially meaning that you engage with countries that you trust are going to be there at a time when you essentially need them, and that's something which we're likely to see build up a little bit more. And this one relationship, an agreement that you talked about, is just one of many. But I would also very much look at the private sector and how that is starting to build up and looking for alternatives to China. Here, of course, as much depends on the US as does on India, particularly India's ability to build the infrastructure required to bring on board that kind of investment. And I think that's going to be an important element which goes beyond just the Indian government or, in fact, the US government as well. And that's where both the private sector, the public sector, as well as entrepreneurs are going to play a really, really crucial role on both sides as well.
Talking about China, Mr. Mithil, coming on to you, the US administration under Donald Trump framed China earlier as a threat for the first time ever. And China would be now closely monitoring the results today. We have seen Trump's bid to make America self-reliant in semiconductors as well. How do you see US-China relationship under Trump's presidency if he wins the election this time?
Well, Trump always likes to, he's a businessman. He always says he likes to make deals, and that's how he's approached his approach with India was different in that sense, that it was a bilateral approach more than the Biden administration, which was a multilateral approach. So I think when he deals with China in the same way, he's going to emphasize that he has a good friendship and a good relationship with President Xi Jinping, and he's going to try to ensure that his personal diplomacy wins out over any kind of any security establishment or foreign policy establishment views that are there in America about China. And so I think the biggest concern for the U.S. is going to be what China is going to do with regards to Taiwan. And I think there is some concern that if President Trump does end up losing the election, that we may see some action in the South China Sea with regards to Taiwan, a blockade most likely, not an invasion. And that's what some of the security analysts have pointed out, that China may go ahead and pull a blockade, because that's what happened with the Biden administration. We had the Afghanistan disaster, we had Ukraine in 2022, and then Israel in 2023. So a lot of people around the world, the nations who are opposed to America and America's foreign policy, are seeing the Democrats as a much more vulnerable position, or much more willing to take those kind of risks. And if President Trump is elected, they do not believe that he would be somebody who would stand for those kind of actions, and he would most likely, go with his sort of what's called the crazy approach, the madman approach that has prevailed. There were no wars, there was no major conflicts during his 4 years in office, and I think that's why he's making the case to the American people that he's a much better president in terms of foreign policy and domestic policy, because pre-COVID, there's a certain nostalgia about what was going on in America with its foreign policy and with its economy.
We'll talk about the markets also, because that is also a very important factor. But before that, coming on to you, Mr. Ramachandran, the Indian community there in America plays a very key role. How do you see that, and how do you see Indians playing a major role in the elections tonight?
I'll try to answer that question, Deepika, by just pointing you to two gentlemen joining us on this panel, Professor Sidhu and Mr. Mithil, who are good examples of what we're discussing about the vibrant Indian-American community in the US. Let me try to answer your question by giving our viewers a contrasting picture, a study of both Kamala Harris and Trump, especially in the context of their policies and their personalities, and also weaving the Indian-American community in the overall argument. If I can just briefly touch upon the community itself, they are 6 million and counting, according to latest figures, the second largest such ethnic group in the US. Now, they've traditionally voted Democrat, but, and this is an important but, Deepika, as the community becomes more affluent, more upwardly mobile, the second generation, third generation Indian Americans are tending to vote Republican. And this shift from Democratic to Republican voting is evident and discernible. Here I can just refer to what Trump said in his Diwali tweet the other day, where he categorically and specifically referred to the situation of the Hindus in the US and elsewhere around the world, including Bangladesh, on which both Biden and Harris have been conspicuously silent on for the longest time. Trump saying that he accusing the Democrats of ignoring the Hindus in the US and elsewhere in Bangladesh, and trying to project or give the argument that if he wrests the White House from the Democrats, he will ensure the safety and security of Hindus everywhere, including the US and Bangladesh, especially from the left-wing extremist elements in some of these countries. Now, talking about the diaspora, generally speaking, Deepika, they are becoming a force to reckon with on the political firmament of the US. They are becoming consequential, a political voice, so to speak, in the US domestic polity. And just to give you a flavor of how the journey they've traversed over the decades, Diwali came to be celebrated for the first time under Obama in 2009, and that's continued to this day. So this community, a small knit but an affluent, influential community, is educated, self-made individuals. They assimilate well into the American society. They're industrious and are willing to hold public office. We saw that in the case of Kamala Harris of Indian American heritage. We saw that in the Republican side as well, in the case of Vivek Ramaswamy or Nikki Haley. So all in all, they are coming into their own, if I can put it that way.
And talking about the same point, Professor Sidhu, how do you see the Indians shaping up the results tonight?
How do I see the Indians summing up the results tonight?
Shaping up the results tonight.
Shaping up. Well, I think as other speakers have very rightly pointed out, the Indian Americans are now far more sophisticated in the sense that they're really right across the spectrum. They're very well represented in both the parties. They are also very prominent in NGOs, in the corporate sector, but also in political areas, as we just heard as well. So I think, again, in that sense, they're becoming more like the average Americans, and they're very much driven by the same sort of issues and concerns that would impact the average Americans as well. So some will be very much driven, as we were discussing earlier, by inflation or the economic concerns, whereas others would be driven by issues like the decision of women to choose. And those are the kind of elements, I think, that are going to play through. But just following the numbers that Mr. Ramachandran mentioned, it's quite evident that still 60% of the Indian population is very much in the Democratic camp, as it were. And I think, certainly having somebody who is of and partly of an Indian heritage would certainly be something that I know Indians of whatever political hue would certainly celebrate, because it would be a momentous development and a change in that sense.
But Mr. Mittal, what sort of a benefit is it going to give to Kamala Harris? We've been seeing the visuals from Kerala, from Tamil Nadu, how several rituals are being conducted over there, worshipping to the Lord and praying for her victory. But then, would that be of any sort of benefit to Kamala Harris there?
Yeah, I don't know how beneficial it would be to her. I think she is sort of, in the sense of trying to get votes, the Indian American population is much more stratified and not unified in any sense, apart from maybe some states like New Jersey and Georgia, but not enough to probably make a difference. So I think she has emphasized more of her African American heritage because she wants to get those crucial votes in swing states like Georgia, in other places, Pennsylvania. So I think she has sort of done a fairly enough job. I'm Republican, so obviously from some of the Indian American Republicans, you'll hear that she has not played up her Indian identity besides celebrating Diwali. But that's neither here nor there. I think it's a good sign that we have Indians are on both sides of the political aisle. They're successful in all kinds of fields, including politics now. And I think it's something to be celebrated in India and abroad and in America, that we're part of the American dream and we're succeeding regardless of our background and regardless of what we believe in. We can have different beliefs, we can have different political fights and still come out on top and be successful.
And now let's talk about the markets also, because that is a very important topic when we talk about the US elections. And because of the strong economic ties between India and the US, Professor Sidhu, the results of US presidential elections often affect the Indian stock market as well. How are the results this time going to affect the markets, considering the historic pattern, be it the victory of Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
I think it may relate to how they look at global economy in many ways as well. But again, as has been said and discussed, there is very much a clear trajectory of India-US relations. And I think the key driver is going to be the question of stability. If the sense is that this election is going to lead to clarity and stability, and that there is no big dispute about it, then there's no doubt that we're likely to see the Indian stock market also do remarkably well. But if there is uncertainty at the political level, which we've seen in the past, or a challenging of the election by one side or the other, some of which will happen through the courts, and that's fine, that may well impact it more sort of negatively, because as far as I understand, the markets prefer stability.
Now, as Professor Sidhu also mentioned about supply chains earlier in our discussion, coming on to you, Mr. Mittal, the US is India's largest trading partner. The impact on trade and business policy will also be the most consequential one. How do you see this shaping up tonight with the announcement of the results?
Yeah, like I said, I think if President Trump wins, he is going to pursue a much more bilateral deal as far as supply chains, as far as making any kinds of manufacturing or economic deals or even military deals. And I think he's going to try to make sure that whatever deals are made or whatever diplomacy happens, it happens through him personally or through his NSA. And so those are going to be the important people to watch out for, who he appoints in key foreign policy positions. Most likely, Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State and the head of the CIA, is going to play a crucial part in and he's played a crucial part of the previous 2+2 defense talks as well. But I think, much more importantly, I think what's interesting to see with the Biden-Harris administration, if Vice President Harris wins, is that even though they were opposed to Trump's foreign policy in broader terms, the Biden-Harris administration did not overturn many of the anti-China policies and many of the sort of strengthening of the U.S. Supply chain and trade issues that Trump had raised and had made a key issue on his campaign in 2016. And so what's going to be interesting to see is what the future Harris administration will do with regards to that. And it's most likely going to be a continuation of that. They're not going to be as possibly polarizing and negative in their language, but they are going to continue the relationships with India. They're going to continue making sure that the supply chain is strengthened and that Indian defense partners, Indian economic partners are much more empowered, and those deals the red tape is cut. And I think that's going to be the policy that they pursue going forward. It may involve, like I said, a much more multilateral approach. They may try to get the Quad much more involved, other countries much more involved. And so there's going to be a little bit of tension in that, I think. There's also folks who are pro-Pakistan in the Democrat Party. I would say there's lobbying on all sides, obviously. And so there's going to be a little bit of tensions and negotiation and discussion on those fronts as well that may thwart any kind of deal. And so, again, Trump may do the bilateral deal, and that may happen much more quicker. And I think Democrats are still going to pursue something in that same strength.
My colleague Ramesh has a question to Mr. Sidhu.
Yeah, Deepika, if I can just quickly ask both our guests one question each, if I may, Deepika. To Mr. Mittal, I mean, would you subscribe to this view that if Kamala Harris wins this election, it would be because voters have voted for the Democratic Party and its values and what it stands for? On the other hand, if Trump wins, it would be because voters are voting for him, the man, and his politics. And also to Professor Sidhu, if I may, Professor Sidhu, knowing your interest in global affairs, if I may ask you to weigh in on the implications of a Harris or Trump presidency on global affairs, especially in light of what is happening between Russia and Ukraine to begin with, between Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah in Middle East or West Asia, as we call it here, North Korea, the tension, the Korean Peninsula to begin with, as well as on the elephant in the room, China and possibly Taiwan. If you can go first, Mr. Mittal.
Yeah, So I think, President Trump and the Republicans have made the economy the main issue. If you talk to the general public, they have also said that the economy is their main issue in this election. Most voters are not happy with the last 4 years of the Biden-Harris administration, and there's a certain nostalgia about the pre-COVID era where President Trump was the president. The economy was doing really well. And even when he won in 2016, there was the markets rallied very quickly. People initially thought that maybe Trump winning would depress the markets or the economy, but that was not the case. So I think that is the strain, the vein and the strain that the Republicans and Trump are taking. I think for Vice President Harris, she has moved away from some of the positions that her own administration has taken over the last 4 years to triangulate, to try to get the votes, to try to make sure that she is a winnable candidate. So she has, for example, in Pennsylvania, fracking is a big economy there. So she has shifted her environmental stance on Israel. She has shifted her stance. She has become much more pro-Israel than she was previously. And on a bevy of other issues, she has made it clear that she's trying to move away from the Biden administration. But it's not clear whether the voters are going to see her as being super distinct, because she has not articulated her positions very well, and she has made her main plank that she is opposed to Donald Trump. And so, as with previous elections, when you make the election about one man, it's more likely that man is going to win. And so, even the 2020 election that Trump lost, it really was a referendum on Trump. And so, this election most likely is going to be a referendum on Trump as well, more than a referendum on Kamala Harris or the Biden-Harris administration. Having said that, I think there is a certainty, there is a possibility that the female vote comes out en masse in the swing states and gives the victory to Kamala Harris, because the social issues and the governance issues in terms of people who are turned off by Trump's language, his rhetoric, and his previous policies a large group of that includes women. Women protested in huge numbers the day after Trump won in 2016. And so there is a possibility that they may end up giving small victories in the swing states to give the presidency to Kamala Harris. But right now, everything is 50-50. We're literally playing with 0.5, 0.3 levels of margins, and not last week it was 2 to 3%, and now it's gone to less than 1% in some of these situations.
Indeed, and if I may quickly ask Professor Sidhu to weigh in on the implications of a Harris or Trump presidency on global crises confronting the US and the rest of the world.
Thank you very much for that excellent and very difficult question, but a very important one as well, undoubtedly. I think the important thing to keep in mind is that one is built based on a very multilateral attitude, which is also, one might argue, based on essentially upholding the rule-based international order. It is also less transactional, and it tends to be, sort of inclusive of other partners. I think if you look at the Trump presidency in the past and perhaps even into the future, you're likely to see three distinct sort of elements to that. Number one, it is going to be much more unilateralist. I would not necessarily say isolationist, but unilateralist. Second, it is going to be much more transactional. As Mr. Mittal rightly pointed out, there'll be more of a desire to have bilateral agreements rather than multilateral ones. And number three, the personal element is going to be very important. So the fact that he has a particular preference for the personality of President Putin or Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary, or even Kim Jong-un of North Korea, is very much going to determine and follow his his pathway, and that would be the approach that he's likely to take. And I would say the same thing vis-a-vis Israel, and certainly, given now that he and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have kissed and made up in many ways, you're likely to see a more sort of weightage on that side. I think in the case of Kamala Harris, as I said, it's going to be much more multilateral, bringing along many more of the partners, but also, being very principled about it. So I don't think we can expect a rapprochement vis-a-vis President Putin anytime soon, or an opening to North Korea. And we might also see a nuanced change in the policy on the Middle East.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Sidhu, Mr. Anand Mittal, and Mr. Ramesh Ramachandran for joining us and bringing us a rounded perspective on history making as the US election polling is underway, and very soon we'll have the results as well. Thank you so much for joining us.